Hello, 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 and welcome to the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissel, and joining me, as always, Garrett Zetlin. How's it going, man?
Ben, I didn't think I was going to have you this week, but so happy to have you on. I thought I was going to have to do another major meet preview without you, but I was actually in your neck of the woods earlier this last weekend and on YouTube commentating the meet. Shout out to everyone. I was able to check out the live stream. The numbers were fantastic. The numbers came back excellent. So appreciate that. We're still going to refine everything moving forward, but appreciate everyone's support at the Lewis XC crossover.
Yeah, I mean, how was that? I mean, how have you commentated races before? Is this one of the
No,
first times you've done that?
Yeah, no, I think now I'm thinking. Yeah, I think that was the first time I've done it. And yeah, like I mean, you could occasionally hear the whispers of like, "Oh, the Stroud report's here," and I was like, "Well, yes, they are." So yeah, it was really cool. I just think everyone was super nice. James Kearney, the head coach there at Lewis, is awesome, awesome dude. You just gotta love all of his energy and passion towards just track and field and cross country. And John Kilpatrick again at the AV crew, they had all the cameras and all the setup there for me. I just got there, I sat down, I said a few things, and it worked out. So really, really fun. I'm very, very tired, but it was all worth it. It was good.
I can imagine. Was there? So I feel like most people who have watched a cross country race before and listened to the commentary are like, oh, I could do this I could do a lot better. This part, like, it's so easy to armchair like critique. Is there something you found harder to do when you were actually the one commentating rather than the one watching?
So we obviously did not handle any of like the live results or anything like that.
Right.
So it's
Mhm.
hard when you only have like the front pack that you're looking at, and you can't really gauge what the teams in a field that big. You can't gauge the
Right.
team score, who really are the individuals behind that lead pack when you're at stationary watching the stream. There, it's a little challenging. So that part was a little tricky, especially because the live results weren't updating like we thought they would. But I don't know. My mom and dad said I did well, which is all the validation in my life that I needed. But I'm sure I probably messed up a handful of things that I'll probably work on next time in terms of delivery and cadence or whatever. But yeah, I had fun. It was good.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, glad to hear it. All right. Well, we got a bunch to talk about today. We'll quickly recap the Bill Dellinger Invitational that happened this past weekend. But then we have pre-nats coming up this coming weekend. So we will dive into a full meet preview of that, what you can expect to see, and what maybe some teams, there's probably a lot of teams actually that really need big performances this coming weekend to get Colos points to kind of give themselves confidence going into their postseason. So there's going to be plenty to talk about there. But before we get into any of that, reminder: leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, subscribe on YouTube. I don't think we had any new additions in the past week, so let's go for a couple in this coming week. But with all that said, let's go into the Bill Dillinger invite. And let's start on the men's side where we saw BYU complete a sweep. And it's hard to, like, in this kind of field where it's not a super loaded field. It was solid. There's some good teams there, but it's hard to really gauge too much off of this result for BYU. They were clearly the class of this field. Now they did about as well as you could expect it, going 1 through 5, and then you throw Lucas Bonds in 7th and David Thompson in 10th. It you really can't complain, but I truly don't know how much we learned about their ability to go neck and neck with Oklahoma State.
No, no. I mean, this doesn't tell us anything new that we didn't already know about them. I do think it shows us that hey, the depth is really good. Bonds is, I think a little bit better than we expected. Davin Thompson's back at least healthy enough. He's maybe not at the best form, but he's healthy enough. Um, and Aiden Troutner's like as good as we thought he was after Nuttycombe. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty spot on. I mean, it doesn't really tell us anything new other than hey, the depth is maybe a little bit better than we thought it would be, and that's it. Like I don't even know if they ran Jacob Stafford, which is the craziest part.
Yeah, they look very, very good. It remains to be seen whether they can match up like firepower wise with Oklahoma State, but they certainly match up from a depth perspective. They're going to have 5 to 6 guys that are competing for All-American spots, it seems. And I think in most years you're going to have a great shot at winning. It's just this Cowboys team is that good that it's going to be an uphill climb. Elsewhere in this race, we saw Oregon finish second, narrowly beating Gonzaga and Montana State. Now we talked a lot, I think, at the end of the spring season about, hey, we're excited about seeing all the progress that Oregon has made. We saw some middle distance runners run pretty well, make it to the NCAA meet. Elliott Cook was awesome throughout that season, but we were starting to see some of the young guys step up. This felt just like either they stayed still or I wouldn't say a step backwards, but their young guys just did not show up and give them the boost they necessarily needed.
No, I mean Birnbaum in 22nd in a fast course like this, you would think that that speed of his turnover and middle distance speed would benefit him. It did not. He fell to 22nd, which is not great for what Oregon needs. Not only that, but I think I don't know if I said this last podcast. Oregon no longer has Devin Hart.
Yeah.
He's gone. He's not on the roster anymore. He obviously hasn't raced, right? But he's not on their TFers roster. He's not on their roster anymore. Had a text sent to me saying, "Hey, Hart's not there anymore," and that stinks. And not only that, but Evan Bishop did not run. Their graduate transfer from Wisconsin, that really stunk, right? And then Evan Dorenkamp in 36th place wasn't even a scorer. So, you kind of go through this and you're like, man, that was underwhelming. Yes, they didn't have Ben Balazs. I don't know how to say that, but they didn't have Connor Burns, who's not there. I don't know where he is. Yeah, this was a little discouraging. Like if I'm Oregon, I'm like, oh yeah, this is certainly a year for them to be better, and I guess they are better than last year, but the bar's low. So I was really expecting more. I didn't expect them to beat BYU or maybe even come close, but I did expect them to soundly beat Montana State and Gonzaga, which they did not.
Yeah, and I think that Gonzaga, you can make the argument, ran fairly well, but I don't even necessarily know that. I mean, Montana State, their top 3 guys ran well, but they didn't run their best. They certainly could have finished second, I think, if they have their because Levi Taylor didn't run in this race either, right?
I don't
Um,
believe so. No.
and so, I mean, if he's, and who knows, maybe he's not healthy and we're not going to see him. But if he's at his best, they easily take second place in this race. So I agree. Just a real downer of a performance for Oregon. Not to say again they have young guys. They have a lot of room to grow and they have a lot of talent on that roster. But it certainly was an underwhelming performance. Now, for Gonzaga, I did mention I think a pretty strong performance. Will Smith leading the way in 9th, and I think we can expect him to be better as the season goes on as well.
Yep.
But you had guys like Logan Law, Bryce Sirkoniak. Go
Sure.
with that. In
That's pretty good.
20th. Pretty solid performances from those guys, and they were able to do just enough to remain extremely competitive with Oregon and edge Montana State. Now, I'm sure they're going to wish they just had those 5 extra points that would have pushed them over the edge to beat Oregon. But I think this is a promising result and shows that, hey, with a little improvement, this can be a nationally relevant team.
Well, they didn't have Drew College either, who did run at the Nuttycombe Invite. And he's a crucial middle lineup scorer, a veteran, offers great stability. And when you see that Gonzaga had a pretty significant drop off at their 5th man spot,
Yep.
College makes all the difference. Like he's the guy who basically will almost definitely put Gonzaga ahead of Oregon. Now, again, Oregon didn't have Bishop. They didn't have Ben Balaz, or however you say his name. So, it's a little bit of a give and take, but I'm actually pretty happy if I'm Gonzaga. Will Smith looks like he's in a better spot. They beat Montana State, a team that could maybe yield them a call-loss point. And they likely have the room to get better. So I thought this was actually a pretty decent run from Gonzaga.
Yeah, and Montana State, I think they have to be pretty happy through 4. Perrin, Sam Ells, Rob McManus all ran pretty well. Will Kelly put in a solid result, finishing 29th. They need Levi Taylor. They need someone to step up because there's just a significant drop off between 4th and 5th. So if they could figure that out, they could be giving out a Colossus point because this is a team that if they do improve that spot has a very solid chance at making the national meet.
They also didn't have Owen Smith, which I think is important
Yes.
to the
Yep.
849 steeplechaser.
He would have helped a lot.
Yeah, Harvey Cram just I think had a tough day. He was in 45th. I think he can be better. This is not a big roster. This is like actually a pretty small roster, but I do think
Yes.
there are options for them to get better.
Yeah, yeah, their margin of error is not huge
No.
with the limited roster that they have. Going to the women's side, Utah, another dominant performance from them, finishing in first with 25 points, easily clearing Oregon and Nebraska, who was in third. I really don't have much to say on Utah. They just continue to put together great performances, and I'm very excited to see what we get out of them at the national meet. I think they're going to be one of those teams that, while I don't necessarily know they have the upside of some of the teams ranked ahead of them, I feel very confident that they're going to put in like a top 6, 7 kind of performance. Like if other teams falter, they're not gonna get beaten, or they're not gonna beat themselves to lose to some teams that don't have their best performances. So yeah, really excited to see what we got out of Utah. Anything that you wanted to add there?
Lindsey Peters did come back in 15th place. She's a nice depth piece. I think she just gives them a little bit of a higher floor. I don't know if she changes much in terms of, like you said, their position, but thought that was important. Real quick before we move on, Utah, what percent chance do you have them getting on the podium right now?
Okay, let me make sure. Um, hmm. I think like a 5%, just because
Five.
I don't love their necessarily high end outcomes, but I almost, again, I feel pretty confident that they could finish in the top 6. I just don't know. It would have to take several teams not hitting their full potential for them, I think, to get into that top 4.
I would give them a 20% because I think
Oh
if you
wow.
phrase it, I think if you phrase it like, hey, 1 in 5 times they get on the podium, I'd be like, yeah. You don't think so?
Yeah.
You don't?
No, I'm not there. No, just because. So I think really we're talking about what, 2 spots essentially, because BYU and NAU are almost certainly taking up 2 of those spots, right? Even
Sure.
if they have off days, they're going to be in the top 4.
Sure.
And then we're talking Notre Dame, Washington, Alabama, NC State, Georgetown.
Yep.
That's just a lot of teams for 2 spots, and I don't like their. I think at least 2 of those teams are going to run pretty well, and I don't know if Utah, their best day, is going to be able to beat those teams running well, like 2 of those teams running really well.
I think the natural attrition that you see in certain scorers on the national stage, I think Utah can avoid that. So I think that
I
removes
agree.
them from the teams that falter. And I think I don't know. Like I think they're I would not argue with anyone if they said they're better than Alabama, they're better than Georgetown, maybe even I don't know, maybe not Washington, but they're better than NC State. I mean, those are teams where I'm like, yeah, they're kind of in the middle there. I don't think they're favored. But if you said, hey, they have a 1 in 5 chance, they're like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, you might have gotten me up to like a 1 in 10 chance. But
Okay.
I think we're both very high on their like floor, and
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that they're going to finish in the top 8 almost certainly. It'd have to take a very something really weird for them not to finish there. I think there are differing in opinions. It's just, hey, if they run a really good race, how high up does that get them?
yeah.
Ultimately. On again, sticking on the women's side, Maddy Elmore led Oregon to their second place finish. She took home the individual win. Some interesting performances, but just again, like the men, leaving us a little cold with these runs.
I mean, the next meet, Big Tens, which is a weird thing to say about Oregon.
Yeah,
That's the meet that will determine like, or what are we actually going to see from this team in the postseason? Maddie Elmore being back and healthy and beating the field that she did, awesome. I think it validates everything. She's a low stick. She's awesome. I think like her coming back is huge.
yep.
We have not seen Solana Yildiz, which is not great. Now remember, Oregon didn't have Mia Barnett for this
Hmm.
meet. And we know she's at least healthy enough as of her last race, was as of 2 weeks ago, right? So there's still another weapon there that Oregon has, which is important to note. But Solana Yildiz is like the biggest biggest one here. So I do think Oregon probably moves up a little bit in our rankings, maybe not a lot, but a little bit. Whenever that next update is, which I think is next week. Um, so yeah, I didn't hate this, but it is interesting to see like how Wilma Nielsen is like their third or their second or third runner right now, which is interesting. Anika Thompson delivered a little bit more on what we thought she could be. Um, but yeah, it's a little bit of an odd lineup, and it's not exactly what I expected to see this fall.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was gonna say. Is like, I think Nielsen ran well. I'm just a little concerned, like if she ends up being there, like let's say that Barnett comes back and but now she's your like fourth or fifth runner. That you feel a little bit better about that, but it still is a little concerning to me moving forward if they're going to be relying on an 800 runner that much in their cross country season. Anything else on the Bill Dillinger invite before we move on?
No, shout out to Nebraska. They had two in the top seven. Thought that was really great. Berlin Schultz and Allie Bainbridge. But other than that, no.
Yep, good result from them. All right, let's move on to pre-nationals, which is at Wisconsin this year. And boy, there is a ton of teams competing in this race. I think we mentioned last week how they were separating the A and B race off of I think the UST FCCA rankings, and so I'm sure there was some controversy around who made it and who did not, especially since the rankings probably the rankings don't. I was thinking about this. The rankings don't go far enough out for them to decide that. They'd have to default to regional rankings.
No, they because they could do receiving votes. Remember?
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's fair. But oh man, that is such an
I'm still in agreement with you. Yeah, I'm like, wait, so no one's actually ranked, but you're extending that part to what receiving vote? I don't know if that's how they did. I assume that's how
because
they did
there's
it, but
32. What is it? 32 teams that make the A race, right?
yes, I think so.
And so and assuming there's some ranked teams that aren't coming, right? That's pushing like 35, 40. Like you're going into the 40s, which
Actually, it's not a terrible point. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you.
yeah, okay. We're getting into minutia here, but this is the thing that I was looking at when I was like, I don't know why they're in, but they're not. I mean, I'm sure there's a good
You're
logic.
right though. They did say national and regional rankings,
Okay.
so it
And
probably
that
regional
is
as well.
dumb. If they are using regional rankings to compare two teams from different regions, that is horrendous. End of rant there. All right, let's get into the preview. Let's talk men's side first, or we can kind of bounce back and forth. Favorites on the men's side, I think are fairly. I don't know. What do you think? Kind of clear.
It
Muddled.
depends on what you want to define as a favorite.
Yeah.
So for me, I think it's I think the favorites are Arkansas and Iowa State. I think those
Yep.
are somewhat clearly the top two. And then if you, and then after
I think there could
that,
be like four. I think there's like four. I don't know. I think there might be four.
yeah, but I'm going to separate Arkansas and Iowa State as the top
Okay.
two. I think at the tier after that is NAU, New Mexico, Notre Dame. And I
Yes.
think that's where I will cut it.
Oh, you're gonna put you put New Mexico in there too, or do you say New Mexico? Sorry,
Yeah, I
you
said
said
New Mexico, Notre Dame, and NAU.
okay.
I am going to put those three teams, but I'm going to
Interesting.
put Iowa State and Arkansas in a tier above themselves. Yeah.
How on a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised would you be if a team not named Arkansas or Iowa State took home the win?
6.5,
Okay.
7. I'm going to go right on a limb and say it right now. I think Iowa State wins.
Interesting.
I actually think they will. I'm scared to say this. I think they soundly beat Arkansas.
It's hard for me to say because Arkansas we still haven't really fully seen yet, especially against like good like high level competition. Because they have so much talent on paper that if it all comes together, then
Yeah.
sure they could absolutely win this. But if you're going to pick a team, Iowa State probably is the safest bet because we've already seen what they can do against high level competition. They're clearly running well. They have a lot of guys who are fit and healthy, and we just don't know that necessarily about Arkansas when you compare them to the best in the country.
Well,
So
not
I
only that, but Iowa State didn't field their top lineup.
yeah,
I have good reason to believe that they're going to have Sanal Masando. I don't know if they'll have Joash Ruto, but if they
yeah,
do, then this gets to be a really interesting. Rogers Kiplimo, did he even run last time? I don't think he did. He's an All American. You can begin to see like, hey, last time, yeah, they got soundly beat by BYU, but they missed like three guys who could
yeah.
very realistically be All Americans. I think Iowa State will win this race, and I think they will somewhat soundly. I don't know what you define as soundly. I think they will soundly beat Arkansas.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I agree that they would be my pick as well. I think, and that's almost why I would put those two tiers together. Is I think NAU is probably pretty close, and Notre Dame if they put together a really good race. I'm not sure how I feel about New Mexico yet. New Mexico is kind of a little bit of a wild card for me. I mean, if they obviously have the top end talent, but I'm curious to see what we see from the back of that lineup. If it's good, like then they absolutely deserve to be in that mix. So, all right, we got the favorites out of the way. Who are maybe some of the sleeper teams on the men's side that you think could surprise some folks?
Mm. Do you have a few? Do you want to go first on this?
I've tried
I,
this one's
I
always hard because depends on how you
how you
define
define it?
sleeper.
Yeah.
So I don't love what we've seen out of Syracuse so far, but this
Mm-hmm.
feels like a Syracuse kind of like
Mm-hmm.
wow, really good regular season performance, gets high up in our rankings, and then at like ACCs or at NCAA's puts together a dud, and we feel dumb, and they always keep us guessing. And I think when we maybe are not expecting a lot, that's when they could shine the brightest.
I'll take Furman because last year Furman did this where they had a poor season opener, at least in their first major race, and then they came back and they got top 10 at what last year's version of Nuttycombe was, right? Which they didn't have Dylan Schubert for their opener at
Yep.
Nuttycombe. I could see this team coming back, making some noise, really making an impact here. Um, in theory, Michigan State should be okay. Should be like pretty decent. But the them in theory is probably a lot different than them on paper. And
Mhm.
so it's a very hard team to kind of gauge there. I gotta be honest, I don't love this field. Like this is not my favorite field.
It's another team that I wanted to mention, and we've talked about them a couple times. Is Wyoming just seems to be running well. Like
Mhm.
they don't. It's hard to say that they're going to be able to stack up in a field this strong and exceed expectations. But hey, they got momentum. They're running well. I think they could just end up being a lot higher than we expect after the dust settles because they just put in a competent performance.
And that's half the time. That's all you need in these larger
Yeah.
fields. Like I'm a believer that when you get to the Nutty Combs and the pre-nats and the nationals, like the competition is just going to like. There's some teams that just get overwhelmed by those fields
Yep.
and they struggle. They get caught behind and they can't move up, and there's just natural attrition. And I think Wyoming, it's like, hey, if you don't get too ahead of yourselves, but you don't get caught too far back and can't make your way up, as long as you find a good middle ground, you're going to beat a few teams that just simply have a flat out bad day and they're going to benefit from that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And Wisconsin's such an interesting course for that, like what you were just saying, where you have to go out fairly aggressively because you can't. It's a hard, especially with this many teams. It is hard to work your way through it. But we have seen the opposite, where teams you have like six guys in the top 30 at like the first mile mark, and they all just fade hard because they went out far too aggressive. You got to kind of find that right balance. And I think you see that from teams who have run this race a lot, have experienced coaches who have them prepared. And I think again that kind of goes to why I think Syracuse could maybe surprise us is they've been here before, they know what to do. This coaching staff knows what to do. They I think they're just going to put themselves in good position.
Well, have Alex Comerford? I'm sorry, not Alex
Well,
Comerford. Have Benny
no.
Anderson? Have Connor Ackley? Have those two?
Some of these guys are young. That's true. But
Those are
I mean,
important.
again, this is I guess it's more of like a from a program perspective. It's
Yeah,
like they
yeah,
know how to get put them in the right spots.
sure, sure. All right, who are your wild cards?
Colorado is certainly one of
Yep.
them.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're one of the most interesting teams to watch in this meet. I think they're going to be for a lot of this year because they do have so much upside from just the talent that they brought in. It was interesting to see the way they ran that first race where it was very much a pack. Do we see that same kind of strategy this week, or do we see them kind of disband a little bit and we see some guys finish a little bit higher up? I'm really curious to see what we get out of Colorado. I truly would not be shocked that if they finish, I don't know, top 7, top 8, or if they finish outside the top 12. Like they seem to have a pretty decent range.
Yeah, I agree. I think Colorado's absolutely that team just because we were like, oh, we're going to learn so much about them at Nuttycombe. And then we walked away being like, I don't think we learned anything. And so there's that team. Stanford's my wild card team.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's just here we go. We're about to see. I mean, their first meet Gans Creek Classic. Yeah, it was impressive. It was a good race, good win, comfortable win, but they didn't really face anyone of any legitimate national caliber. How will they fare in this field, right? How will the young brothers, as the focal lead scorers, is Cold Sprout truly back? We will see. Thomas Boyden, he seemed to have like a nice little rally there at the end.
Mhm.
Top 10 finish at Gans Creek. We'll see then. So yeah, Stanford for me is like a big wild card. I really don't think we know a lot about them. I think they've shown some promise, but we really don't know anything about them. So
Absolutely. I mean, this could be the Youngs like coming out party. Like if they put together like this could be their statement performance that puts them firmly in like one of the top runners in the country conversation. If they can show what they showed at Gaines Creek and translate it to an awesome performance here, that just elevates them to a certain to another level. And same with Stanford as a team. Like if they can have a few front runners, if Cole Sprout is who he was a couple years ago at this race, all of a sudden this Stanford team could be far exceeding expectations after years of not doing.
I agree with everything you're saying there, but I want to move us off of that. I want to talk about the teams that we think need a good race the most for the national qualifying scenario in order to get Colas points. And to make a long story short about the Colas scenario, Colas is basically the process in terms of how the NCAA selects which teams will be advancing to the national meet each year. Basically, teams that advance to the national meet will give a point to teams still waiting to be selected. If you meet certain criteria and you have enough points, you'll be selected. That's the long story short of it. In terms of the teams that I think need it, I actually
I have
I
like three
don't.
teams
Yeah, I was going to
that
say
I think.
who are those teams for you? Because I think I have an interesting tidbit here that you might find interesting.
Okay. So I already mentioned Wyoming. I think they could use a good performance here. California Baptist also falls in that bucket for me, and Michigan State I think is another team that could just pick up a couple points. All these teams are very solid regions where they got a couple teams ahead of them that they're probably not going to get one of those two automatic qualifying spots, and they just need a few points to make sure that they're positioned well if they finish third, fourth, fifth in their region.
So remind me which teams you just said. You said Michigan State. You said who else?
Wyoming and
Wyoming.
California
Yeah,
Baptist.
California. Okay. So the um, I was thinking Wyoming, but I actually am not quite as worried about them from a Colos perspective as I am maybe a few other teams. I just thought this was interesting. I think Air Force might need the points. And here's a fun
Yeah.
tidbit: NAU, BYU, Colorado, and New Mexico. We feel pretty good that those four
Yeah.
teams will probably advance the national meet out of the mountain region, correct?
Yep. Yep.
I'd say the
Correct.
second tier is teams that wouldn't surprise us if they made it, although they by no means locks. Those teams would be Air Force, Montana State, and they would probably be Wyoming as well,
Wyoming.
right?
Yep.
So that's another 3 teams, right? We have 7 teams that could realistically get in. But what if I told you that there's maybe an 8th team? Because remember, Texas Tech did not run Solomon
Oh
Kipchoge and
no.
Joe Piani. And yes,
Wait, are they
Texas Tech,
mountain?
they are mountain.
Oh, I
Most
forgot
people
about
don't
that.
think that. Yes, most people don't realize this, but Texas Tech is in the mountain region.
Oh
If
man.
Texas Tech comes back and wins, or not wins, if they run Solomon Kipchoge, right, and they turn out to be better than expected and they get pushed in, well, now guess what? That's one push scenario gone. And now all these teams like Montana State, like Air Force, they need the points to get in. And so I think Air Force is going to really need these points.
You're absolutely right. And where my head just went was, all right, who going through the Big 12 championship, who can Texas Tech realistically get points off of? Because that's their one shot, right? Is there a
Yeah,
scenario where they get enough points? They're not going to beat BYU.
no,
They could beat Colorado. That would be a stretch. They're
it would be a
not going to beat
stretch.
Oklahoma State.
They're not beating Iowa State.
No, they're not beating Iowa State. Yeah, so I mean, they're not going to get point. They're not going to get enough points.
No.
So yeah, that is going to be absolutely brutal for
Isn't
those
that
teams
wild?
you mentioned. I mean, that stinks. Like, and that's like the luck of the draw with the Colas system is you could just have a team like that who just flies by the seat of their pants during the regular season, and then just runs well at regionals, gets pushed in, and that leaves you high and dry despite you maybe running fairly well throughout the season and having more Colas points than a lot of other teams that are going to get in front of you.
There, we could realistically see 8 teams make it out of the mountain region
So
this year.
so do you think? I guess yeah.
I don't think we'll see it, but I think it's realistic.
So it's interesting, like with the Colas, and I'm sure we'll obviously go into this more before regionals, but I feel like it's almost more likely it's either there's going to be 8 teams or there's going to be like 4 teams that make it. Like depending on where Texas Tech lands.
Yeah.
I feel like that could end up being the case.
I think actually Wyoming's the team that really I think determines a lot because I think they're going to pick up
Sure.
another point or two. I think they probably already have a point or two already this season.
Yeah.
I think they probably will have enough to get in, but will they place high enough in their region to even have those points matter and to even have a shot at being selected? To which I don't know. Because if they fall back enough and Texas Tech is like 1 or 2 spots ahead of them, then they can't push Texas Tech in. Texas Tech can't then get in if no one behind them has enough points. So
exactly, they need Texas Tech to either run really really well or really poorly, like at regionals. That's going to be what like all those teams are going to be rooting for, right? Because they either need to get them to get pushed in early by another team that has a ton of points, or they just need them to falter because if they're sitting at 5th and the like Wyoming for example sitting at 6th, they could be waiting a little while.
Well, I think Montana State and Air Force want Texas Tech to be hit by a meteor and wiped off the map. Like Texas Tech is their biggest threat. Like they could create so many issues for them in the qualifying scenario. But yeah, it could potentially be a nightmare in the mountain region this year.
No, absolutely great point, and I'm glad we went down that tangent because yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Any other teams? I mean, Furman could probably use to pick up a couple points. That would be good for
Furman
them.
could would no, I
Ole
don't think so.
Miss, I don't expect them to, but that would be absolutely massive for them.
Yeah, I'm not really on the Ole Miss train right now.
I
What
am
about
not
the
either.
Northeast region? Who else is in that Northeast region other than Syracuse? There's Harvard, right? So I'm trying to think. Do Syracuse and Harvard?
Iona.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably Iona is of the group that needs the help more. But I'm trying to think. Was
Yeah.
there another team in the Northeast that will need the help to beat Harvard and or Syracuse? And I don't think there is.
That's not Harvard, right?
Yeah, Harvard's Northeast. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah. Princeton's Mid Atlantic, right?
Princeton's Mid Atlantic. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
So
You're,
yeah.
you're looking at like Dartmouth, Cornell. Those are the kind of Ivy leagues up there. That
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Iona. This. I mean, yeah, this could be very, very important for Iona then, to pick up a few points because again, they're probably not going to get pushed in if they finish third. They're going to need to be able to get the points to get themselves into the meet.
I think Texas might actually be another team that. Hey, look, man. I know Arkansas's in that South Central, but like, how comfortable do we feel about Texas right now? Like, Texas did not look great. They don't have Roger Rivera. They lost all those low stakes. Or did you not think like Tulane could make things interesting?
Yeah, I guess that's what we'll figure out. I think this weekend is who's in that pole position for that second spot. I mean, the South Central's been so bad for so long that
It's
it
still
didn't
bad.
even
To be clear,
matter.
it's still bad. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it didn't even matter what Texas did. But I mean, the fact that Tulane's in the A race, is again probably a product of the way they did the regional rankings because they were probably highest up on the regional rankings compared to a lot of teams. But it's huge for them because they one get to go head to head with Texas. But I mean, if they pick up a few points, which I don't think they will, that could be a way they get into the national meet, just kind of through the back door, more or less.
all right. Let's move to the women's side. I feel like it's pretty fair to say that BYU and AU are probably
Yes.
the pretty clear 1-2 tier of favorites there. NAU obviously being favored over BYU after beating them at Joe Piani. How list the teams in the tier below that?
All right. Notre Dame,
Okay.
Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, I think that's the next tier. I don't know if I
You
put
don't think
NC State
NC
in there.
State? No, really.
Yeah, I'm not super high. I'm not super high on NC State this year, which is a little contradictory because I'm pretty high on NAU on the men's side still. I'm not that worried about them, but I am a little concerned about what we're seeing from NC State this year. I just don't think their margin of error is so low, and they just don't have that firepower that is going to get them out of jail if they don't run a complete team race.
I'll say this. I don't know that they're going to have Leah Stevens. I heard a rumor that she might not be back, and if that's the case, that's brutal. Um,
They
and
need
they
her.
need, I know.
That is I guess that's the biggest difference from previous NC State teams is like you could afford to have one of your top women not be running or not at their best, but like they need everyone firing for them to be to be podium contenders.
I'll throw them in there out of respect. Um, it wouldn't like surprise me if they were like, if they got fifth behind NAU, BYU, Notre
Yeah,
Dame, and
Washington.
Washington. Thank you. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. So that's why I'll say that they're in that tier.
Yeah, no, and I don't think we disagree that much. I just think like there's probably going to be if they do finish fifth, there's going to be a little bit of a gap. Like you'll have the 1-2 a gap to third, and then 3-4 a gap to fifth. So that's the only reason why I have them a little bit outside that tier. But as far as Washington and Notre Dame, who do you feel better about going into this weekend of challenging those top two the most?
I'll say Washington because I still see upside with them. I think I
Yes.
like their options more. I still think there's a little bit more room to improve. I think Notre Dame is, as of right now, as we're recording this on Monday, October 14th, I think Notre Dame is the better team, but I think there's way more upside with Washington in this kind of race, especially if they bring back Sophie O'Sullivan and Samantha Tran and Amina Matug's at the top of her game and so on and so forth.
I completely agree. For me, Notre Dame ran about as well as you could have asked at Joe Piani,
Yep.
and I think there's not a ton of meat left on that bone for them to be able to elevate. Whereas Washington, like you said, just has just reinforcements are the
Yep.
reason why they could excel even more. I I would be very surprised if we saw Notre Dame end the season in our top three in our rankings. I think they deserve that spot going into this race based off what they've done so far, but I just don't. I think this is their high water mark moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. No, I very much agree. But in terms of the sleepers, who's the sleeper teams for you?
All right. Do you have somebody in mind?
Yeah, yeah. I'll take Florida. I like Florida a lot, like a lot, a lot, a lot. I think they were way better at the words are tough. I think they were way better at Gans Creek Classic than people realized. Didn't have Hilda Olamamwe, would have beaten Stanford had she run and had she assumingly won. I think they were also missing like one other key name who I'm not thinking off the top of my head right now. I like Florida a lot, like a lot, a lot, a lot. I also like Oklahoma State. This is a classic, like oh, we wrote them off, and then they're like way better than I think we thought. Liberty is up there. Minnesota has earned my respect quite a bit. I think that's the group. I could see like UConn's top three being like a
You
really
know what? That's a
big,
great point. Yeah,
yeah,
I like that a lot. You were starting to name all of mine, so I agree with the Yukon, but I also the two that I was going to mention were Liberty and Minnesota as well. Again, for Minnesota, just very much in like the Wyoming mold on the men's side.
yep,
Like we haven't seen it against this necessary level of a field, but they have been running well, and I'm confident that they can take their momentum and at least put in a solid performance. And then for Liberty, I just think there's too much talent for them to not at least put themselves in a strong position team wise.
yeah, yeah. No, I completely agree. Again, Connecticut being my other team there, I think if that top three is able to kind of replicate what they did at Paul Short, not necessarily place to place, but just in terms of the value, the scoring value, I think they could get really interesting there as well. Who are your wild cards? I feel like I've got a couple here.
So I know we mentioned them on the men's side, but Stanford, like this is such an interesting Stanford team. If Sophia Dudek is like who she like has been before and looked good at Gaines Creek, this team becomes so much more dynamic. Sophia Kennedy looked good.
Do they
Who am
bring
I
back Amy
forgetting? Amy
Bunnage is the
Bunnage
question.
didn't run.
Yeah,
Like
she didn't run.
you throw her in there, that's a extraordinarily good
Mm-hmm.
top three. You have Julia Flynn who ran well at Gaines Creek, and Riley Stewart has just is always solid. You can count on her to
Mm-hmm.
be a fourth or fifth scorer.
Yep.
Like if Riley Stewart ends up being their fifth scorer, like this is a like extraordinary dynamic team who could easily finish fifth in my mind.
I don't hate that. I don't hate that at all. I actually somewhat agree with that as well. In terms of the wild cards, though, and I do think they're a bit of a wild card because I think if like they have one thing go wrong, you get like a
Oh
little
yeah, like
finicky.
if yeah, it's a little bit of a house of cards, right? Like they don't have like an inordinate amount of depth, and if like we've obviously seen inconsistency with some of their top women, so like it could go off the rails very easily.
Michigan State's a wild card for me. Like they should be way better. They struggled at Joe Piane like a lot. I struggle to believe that's actually how good they are. So I think they're going to be a wild card. I think Arkansas maybe is a weird, like in a weird way. Like I think they're going to bring back Sydney Thorvaldsen. I think that 1-2-3 punch is going to help them in this field, in theory. Lipsicum, by the way, fun fact: Rachel Hickey, one of our writers here at the Stride Report, pointed this out. Lydia Miller, their All-American, is not on the roster anymore. She's not on Tifer's roster or their actual roster. I said, did she get married and they changed her last name? Is there a Lydia on the roster? No, there's not a Lydia on the roster. So they're just gone one low stick, which really stinks. At least that's I haven't checked it yet myself, but I trust Rachel. So that's her. I think Texas is a wild card. I think, gosh, there's so many teams here that are considered wild cards. So yeah, I'm really perplexed about like many of these teams. Tennessee,
Yeah,
another one.
yeah, Lipscomb was going to be one that I mentioned. They obviously we've seen what they can do at their best, but if they don't have Lydia Miller, what is their new best now? And obviously we just saw them have a poor performance earlier in the year. Louisville is another team I'm pretty
Mm,
interested in seeing.
yep. Hmm.
They threw down a good race earlier in the season, but this seems like one of those where it's a learning experience for some of these women. Now they do have some veterans in that lineup, so they could perform pretty well in this type of field. But very interested to see what they do this weekend.
Who needs a good race the most from a national qualifying standpoint?
All right, let's scroll through the list here. Utah Valley could use it.
They
I
could
don't
use it.
know what do you expect from that? Like, is that
So I don't know that Morgan Noakes is going to be racing, and I think
okay?
that's the tricky part. I don't expect her to race based on just some rumors. I don't know if that's true, but I don't think she will. And if not, then that does make things a little tricky there. And I'm trying to
Yeah,
pull up like a mountain region team. Oh, here we go. Yeah, it would be difficult because BYU, Colorado, New Mexico, Northern Arizona, Utah. Yeah, they're probably need because I don't see them beating any of those teams.
yeah, I
So I think
agree.
they need the points for sure. Yeah.
Let's see. I mean, Minnesota. We mentioned them. It would just be good to get another couple points. Um, I'm coming up empty.
So I've got a couple here.
Okay.
This one's going to surprise a few people. Arkansas. Arkansas might need some points because here's the thing. Arkansas is in the South Central region, and we've all been like the South Central. It's a breeze, right? Well, their depth is bad, like bad, and they lost to Texas and LSU at the Chili Pepperexy Festival. Now
And
they didn't.
LSU looked good this past weekend at
They
Florida
did.
State.
They looked very good this past weekend at Florida State. So if they had Cindy Thorvaldsen in that race and they had gone 1, 2, 3, yes, they beat LSU, but they still lose to Texas. And guess what? It's not like they would have crushed LSU. Not only that, but guess who's back this year? Texas A&M. They were a national qualifying squad last year,
Mhm.
top 2 in the region. I don't expect them to be top 2 this season, but still, right? You have them. Tulane. Tulane is arguably plenty competitive in that region as well. You could argue that things could get interesting. I do think Arkansas matches up better than Tulane, but I'm not convinced that like Arkansas is in the clear by any means. I think this is like a really interesting scenario for them.
Yeah, I completely skipped over their name because I just pencil in Arkansas every year or put
Right.
them in pen, quite frankly. But yeah, you're right. I mean, based off of the performances that they've had, and I think when I was just scrolling through random meets this weekend, just popped into Florida State and was like, holy smokes, LSU, that was a heck of a performance. They look really good. Like they look like they're going. You're gonna have to put together a solid run to be able to beat LSU, and Texas looks good enough to snag one of those two spots. So yeah, I mean, they want to give themselves some cushion where they don't have to beat both of those teams. This is their opportunity to do that.
So the other team I had was Iowa State. So Oklahoma State would feel pretty good about
Yep.
being a top 2 team in their region, but they've now got to deal with a sneaky good Northwestern team. And Iowa State was they also have to deal with Minnesota. Minnesota's now looking like a
Yeah.
pretty sneaky good squad themselves. And not only that, but Iowa State struggled at Nuttycombe. They were what 20th, I think. So it's not like they really got any points out of that.
Yeah.
I think Iowa State were just like, well, they'll be at the national meet. Sure, I'm not convinced of that. They probably need some points here. So I'd say them. I think they need some points. I think Harvard probably needs the points in that Northeast region.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they're going to probably need some. Um, I'm trying to think of who else
That
here.
Midwest is going. That Midwest regional is going to be really interesting because it's going
Mhm.
to be tightly bunched. There isn't none of those teams are significantly better than one another. It is going. I mean, that could be one where it's like you could have two women finishing side by side, and whoever leaned better is the team that gets into nationals.
Well, think about this. And I said Harvard there, but also like going back to the Northeast real quick. Boston College,
Yeah.
Connecticut, and Harvard will likely all fall behind Syracuse and Providence for those top two spots in the region,
Certainly.
right? So one of them has to get third, obviously, or we're going to assume is going to get third, right?
Yeah.
Those are the main three contenders. Are they going to have enough points to get in? And if they're not, then what happens if a team behind them has enough points and pushes that team in? But more importantly, what happens if the team of those three has enough points but falls to fifth and therefore can't push in the fourth or third place team? This will determine a lot for those three teams in this region because someone's going to come out of there with enough cost points to get in. Just a matter of who.
All three of those teams are going to be rooting for each other this weekend.
Yes.
They all want them to collect, and this is like I feel like this is where UConn has like a great opportunity. They obviously have some good low sticks. This is where in a big field that can be super useful. They can finish a lot higher up, and then when they come to the regional meet, those low sticks aren't going to be as like differentiating from these other teams, and they could easily finish fourth in that kind of meet or even fifth. They're gonna. I don't see a world where like there's 5 teams that make it out of the Northeast, but if you want to at least give yourself a shot at qualifying and finishing in the top 4 at your region, this is like I think this is UConn's time to shine. This is probably the most important meet of their year, quite frankly, because if they don't put it together here, I struggle to see a way that they make it to nationals.
Do you have anything further on this before I go to my final question for you?
No, all good.
Give me one bold prediction for the men's race and one bold prediction for the women's race.
All right. Bold prediction. NAU wins on the men's side.
I love that. That's good. Okay.
I think people are writing them off a little bit. Now, I don't know if they're. I think they're going to be even better at nationals than they are here. So maybe they're just not fully peaked and they lose to again a very good Iowa State team. Could absolutely see that happening. But I'm pretty high on NAU going into this meet on the men's side.
On the women's side.
You go ahead. You go ahead on the men's, and
on the men's side,
take the women's after.
Iowa State scores under 50 points.
Woo! How many times has that happened at like? Well, I guess this is hard to gauge because this is a like a super loaded nutty comb essentially.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. It's not a lot.
Yeah.
But my argument here is like, okay, it's Arkansas, and like who else really is going to have that many low sticks chopping it up with Iowa State?
Yeah.
I mean, let's go through the list real quick. Wisconsin, maybe one, right?
Yeah.
And I go through like I'm going through this list here. NAU maybe one. New Mexico maybe a 2 or 3 at the best, right? And then it's kind of a Harvard if they run grand blanks. But kind of beyond that, I don't really see anyone else other than Arkansas that's going to have a ton of low sticks. So I like Iowa State if they're going to be better.
Yeah, with my prediction, I'm basically saying that NAU is going to have some a couple in there more than we expect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hear you. I totally get that. On the women's side, I'm going back to a team that I've felt confident in going into the season. They made me look good at Nutty Comb. I'm going to say that Furman is going to better their Nutty Comb performance, where they finish 6th, equal or better, 6th or better at the pre-national race.
I like that. That's spicy. That's really good. I will predict. That Florida is top 5.
Ooh, that's even spicier than mine.
That is even spicier. And by top 5, I mean like 5th. I think they're going to get 5th.
Yeah.
So
you're not banking on a 3rd place performance there.
I am not. No. I think there's going to be a little more volatility there than we realize. I think it's NAU, it's BYU, and then I think it opens up. I think NC State's a little bit vulnerable. I don't think New Mexico's quite there yet. I think Notre Dame, if they've won tough off day from someone, they're mainly
Yep.
a top name, things get really tough. I'm still trying to figure out Stanford. We haven't seen Amy Bunnage yet. I've got questions for a handful of these teams here, and I see a lot of upside with Florida. I think they're better than people realize, and I will take Florida in 5th place.
Hey, all right. I'm hoping we get at least one of these. These are 4. Like we went on the bold side of the bold predictions. So if we
We
get
did.
one of these, we are going to be talking about this extensively next week.
I butchered my bowl predictions from my solo pod for Nuttycomb, and like they weren't even close. The actual predictions, like the actual like like who's the sleeper picks, who's the favorites,
Yeah,
who's
yeah.
like all that was pretty good. But like me trying to be like, this is gonna happen, nothing close. No, nothing remotely close.
All right. Well, hey, we're gonna reverse that tide. We're gonna go 4 for 4. That's the
Oh,
boldest prediction of them all. But yeah, I'm really excited. This is obviously pre-nationals is always a big race, but pre-nationals at Wisconsin is always the biggest race
yeah,
of the regular season that you'll ever really see. So very excited to watch this coming weekend. We're gonna learn a ton, and I always like to point this out. This weekend is when you will know the most about teams before the national meet.
yep,
You're gonna learn a little bit at conferences. You're gonna maybe learn a little bit at regionals, but from this weekend on, we're gonna be looking at this race as our most important like performance to how we decide how teams are going to do at nationals. So this could not be bigger for the teams, could not be bigger for us when we're analyzing it. So very excited to dive in after the results come.
Oh, this is a Saturday race. I thought this was Friday.
That's good for me. Very excited.
I
about
think,
that.
yeah, I was like, I think this is good for me. I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure that out. Yeah, awesome stuff. Super excited. We're going to have a full women's preview that I might just publish by itself, and a full men's preview that I might just publish by itself. So super exciting there. We're going to have Mike on that. We're going to have Rachel on that. Of course, I'll be on that. And then after by the time, yeah, after this upcoming week, then we'll have updated rankings, and that'll be kind of like all right, here's where we really think everyone's settling in now that we know who's going to be racing and who's not, things of that nature. So super excited. Andrew LeMay will be he's basically in his backyard to go cover this meet. He'll be having some shots up. We'll be covering that live, of course. So super excited. And stay tuned to the site. A lot of good stuff. Go check that out. Of course, all the Lewis XC crossover stuff can be found on YouTube and the site. And that's all I got.
All right. Until next week, Garrett, I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.